So it's a new year, which means it's a good time to ask questions about what we're doing with our lives. And I don't know about you, but I have noticed this really disturbing trend in our culture over the past few years. How many times have you been part of a conversation? Or how many times have you overheard a conversation that goes something like this? So how you doing, man? Oh, I'm good. I'm just busy. Staying busy. How are the kids? How's the job? Oh, good. It's just, it's really busy. We're running from here to there, going there to here. And if you really want to step up your game, you throw in that word crazy before busy. And it looks like this. How you doing, man? Oh, man, it's good. I'm just crazy busy. Crazy busy. Y'all have heard this, right? And it's like, seriously, when did this happen? When did crazy busy become the new normal in our culture? And I think there's this deep peace inside of all of us, this inner wisdom that says, wait a minute. It is not supposed to be this way. It is supposed to be better than this. And so this morning I'd like to explore with you this question. What does it look like to have a focused, disciplined, intentional life in which you're not crazy busy? And I want to explore this question through three really basic general ideas. And the first idea is this. You can't do it all. You can't. You have limits, and limits are your friend, and your ego will hate you for admitting this. But you can't do it all. Idea number 2. The art of letting go of the old thing and the reminder that when you set out to do the new thing, there will always be those who try to get you to stay with the old thing. That's a mouthful, but it's true, isn't it? Anytime you step onto a new path, or you set out to do a new thing, there will always be those who say to you, wait a minute, I don't understand. I don't understand that path. I don't agree with that path. I don't really like that path. And at some level, we have to be okay with it, don't we? Because it's not their path. It's your path. Basic idea number 3. This is a spiritual project, a spiritual journey. And what I mean by that is, this morning, I don't want this conversation to just be another self-help talk, right? There is plenty of that out there. You can get some really great books on the 4 ways to be a new you and to be the better you. And there's YouTube talks and TED Talks and seminars you can go to. And I'm not knocking them. I think they're good. Some of that stuff is really good. I think we can benefit from it. But I want to remind ourselves this morning that this is a spiritual project that we're in, because we are talking about the deepest things we know. And that throws us into the spiritual realm, because your life is a holy, sacred gift, and what you do with it matters. And let me give a little disclaimer before we get too deep into things here. I do not by any means have this stuff nailed. In fact, if I had it nailed, we wouldn't be talking about it this morning. I mean, this is the stuff I struggle with. And I try to, when I get up here and talk with you all, I try to not talk about the stuff I have nailed, which is very few things anyway. But I figure if I'm struggling with this, then probably some of you are struggling with it. And a very simple observation is many of you don't have this thing nailed either. And that's why we need to talk about it, right? So let's jump in, shall we? And let's begin with a story. Because there's a great story in Luke's Gospel, chapter 4. And up to this point, Jesus has been teaching and healing and talking about this thing called the kingdom of God. And Jesus has been bringing new life to people who need it most. And then we come across this short, beautiful story in the middle of it all. And here's how it goes. Luke chapter 4, verses 42 and 43, just 2 verses. At daybreak, he departed and went into a deserted place. And the crowds were looking for him. And when they reached him, they wanted to prevent him from leaving them. But he said to them, I must proclaim the good news of the kingdom of God to the other cities also, for I was sent for this purpose. Now, it's kind of a little fascinating story, isn't it? Here Jesus is teaching, healing, bringing good news to people, bringing life to people. And then Jesus attempts to leave, to go to this deserted place so he can go on to a new city. And the crowds follow him. And they say, wait a minute, Jesus, you can't leave us now. Where are you going? And Jesus says, oh yeah, I'm leaving. I'm leaving. I got some more good news to proclaim into some other cities. I'm out of here. Jesus leaves because Jesus says yes to his story, his mission, his purpose. Therefore, Jesus has to say no to these other things, even though these other things may indeed be good things. Are you with me? So a few years ago, I made the intentional decision to begin working through my story, making sense of it, coming face to face with it, trying to bring some meaning to it, owning my story. And if you've ever been through the process of owning your story, you know that this is heart-grueling work. It's some of the hardest work you can do, but it's some of the best work you can do. It's very rewarding. And also a few years ago, I stumbled upon this thing called Storyline. Many of you know about Storyline. Many of you have been a part of a Storyline community in this community a couple of years ago. And so I don't want to rehash all the ideas of Storyline, but what I want to say is this. In the Storyline process, you are discovering your life theme. So once you go through your story, you then discover your life theme. Your life theme is a phrase or a sentence that captures who you are and what you're about. And you know, some people will go through their story and it just takes some time and discernment and weeks of coming up with that life theme. And others, they'll go through their story and that life theme just pops at them. It becomes so obvious. It's so clear. And I was one of those that when I went through the Storyline process, my life theme just popped out. It was so clear to me. And my life theme is this: to help others experience God and beauty in the midst of their mess and brokenness. And you might say, man, that's kind of weird. So you're just always involved in like mess and brokenness? I mean, what about the other stuff in the world? What about the joy part? I mean, how'd you get there? How'd you arrive there? Simple. It's my story. And I'll share with you some things that's not new. I'm not dropping any bombs here. But when I was 5 years old, my parents divorced. It was a really ugly divorce. It caused a lot of pain and heartache and ugliness for many, many years. And I also grew up with a brother who was 3 years older than me, and he lived a life of drug and alcohol addiction. And at the age of 22, when I was almost 19, my first year in college, that addiction took his life in the form of a car accident. And then years later, I had to admit to myself and others that the same addiction that held him captive also held me captive. Dang. And you see, I tell you these things to say, this weird thing in my life of always finding God in the struggle. So when I'm talking about my deepest experiences with God, my deepest encounters with God, they've always been at the bottom. They've always been when things are seemingly falling apart. They've always been in states of hopelessness. It's been a thing in my life where I encounter beauty in the struggle. There's a reason on my wrist I have beauty tattooed here and struggle tattooed on this wrist. Because in my life, they have so often gone together. I can't experience the beauty without having first experienced the struggle. And God has this way of inviting us back to those places, calling us back to those places where we've had the most profound experiences. Go back there. That's where you have something to say. Go be with them. And here's the thing. I can't do it all. I can't do it all. And part of the freedom comes in realizing I don't have to do it all. I don't have to do it all. All I have to do is remain true to my story. All I have to do is be my authentic self, my true self. That is what the world needs of me, and it's what the world needs of you. The world needs you to be your true self, your authentic self. Stay true to your story. You don't have to do it all. Figure out who you are. Figure out what you're passionate about. Figure out those things in life that bring you the deepest senses of joy. Figure out the things that you want to say yes to so that you can begin saying no. Figure out what you want to say yes to so you know the things to say no to. It's the beauty of a life theme. It functions as my filter. It helps me say yes to things, but more importantly, it helps me say no to things. Because you can't do it all. You can't. And there'll be times where you look out into the world and you say, man, but there's just so much good work happening. There are so many great projects that need help. There's so many good organizations and causes that need help. Yeah, they need help. They need you, but you can't care about all of it. You can't. You don't have the heart capacity for it. And you know when you try to do everything, when you try to give yourself to everything, you can't really do anything well. You're giving mediocrity at best. Is it true? Rob Bell is one of my favorite theologians and public speakers, and he's got this great line where he says, "The good is often the enemy of the best." Man, that's true too, isn't it? The good is often the enemy of the best. How many times have you given yourselves to lots of good things, but in the process you failed to give yourself to the few best things? It's a new year. What are you doing with your life? And anytime you set out to do a new thing, anytime you set out on a new path, there will always be those who come along and try to get you to stay with the old thing. You know what I'm talking about here? Like when Jesus left to that deserted place and the crowds catch up to him, you know there were some among the crowds that were saying, laying a big guilt trip on Jesus, right? Come on, Jesus. You can't leave us now. You want to just leave so-and-so? After you've done all this good, you just want to leave now? I mean, come on, Jesus, you can't leave us. You know, I still remember the time in my life in college when I came to the realization that I no longer fit in a certain religious box. I no longer fit in the tradition of the evangelical church that I was born and raised into. And I remember the realization of stepping out of that and stepping into a new thing, the world of the mainline church, of the United Methodist world. And there were some who were saying to me, wait a minute, Ryan, you can't do that. That's not your thing. You can't do that. Well, I don't understand that. I don't like that path. I don't agree with that path. And see, what happened is I would get stuck in all these debates and arguments about trying to prove the validity of my path. But here's the thing. It wasn't their path. It's my path. And I would get stuck in thinking I had to hustle for my worthiness. You ever done that? You ever had to hustle for your worth? Yeah, you don't have to do that. Not in this new year, not 2017. You're worthy because you are. So let me ask you, are you considering leaving an old thing, stepping into a new thing, stepping on to a new path? You don't have to convince others of the validity of that path. And that is not to say we don't need community. We need community. We need people around us, people who can be honest with us, people who can point out our blind spots, people that we trust. But make sure those people love you. Make sure they're the ones that love you most deeply. Make sure they're the ones that have your back. They're going to be with you. And be faithful to the path that God has called you to set on. You know what I mean? Be faithful to that path. Because when you're faithful to that path, you can walk it with confidence and with your chin up. And it's a new year. What are you doing with your life? I want remind ourselves that this is a spiritual project. It's a spiritual journey, because when we're asking about what are we doing with our lives, it requires our whole being, doesn't it? I mean, it takes our whole being. It's not just a compartmentalized question. It's every part of ourselves. And the starting place is your life is a holy, sacred gift. You have breath, and there's a source behind that breath. Many of us in this room refer to that source as God. And God has essentially said to you, here's your life. What do you want to do with it? Here's your life. What do you want to do with it? And parents, don't we say the same thing to our kids? Or maybe your parents said it to you. Here's your life. What do you want to do with it? I mean, isn't God the great parent that acts in the same way, right? Here's your life. What do you want to do with it? And with that, there's all sorts of joy and freedom and responsibility. And I think God is saying to us all the time, you don't have to live in the crazy busy. I mean, this is the God who gives us rhythms. Rhythms of work, play, rest. Work, play, rest. You don't have to live. Give yourself to the crazy busy, the overcommitted, the distracted, the here but not really here. Life is better than that. The gift of your breath is worth so much more than that. So what are the few things you're going to give yourself to this year? Because when you say yes to these few things, then you can be fully present and engaged with these things. And here's the kicker. When you're not too busy giving yourself to everything, when you're not too busy thinking you can do it all, you can actually stay focused, disciplined, and be intentional with the few things. And then you can actually be present to the relationships that matter most in your life. You see, when you're not busy giving yourself to everything, then you can actually be present with your family. See, when you're not busy giving yourself to everything, then you can actually be present to the relationships that you want to invest in. You can actually be there and all the way there. When you're sitting with those people, your heart and your mind, they're not racing towards 100 other things because you haven't given yourself to 100 other things. You've given yourself to a few things, and you're going to do those things well. So let me close with asking you just a few questions. Are you living in the crazy busy? Overcommitted? Distracted? Here but not really here? What are you going to say yes to this year? And once you figure that out, that'll help you figure out what you're going to say no to. And is there anything you're doing because of guilt? Because someone guilted you into it? And are there things you need to let go of so that you can actually step out of the crazy busy? Do you know your path? Do you know your story? And is it time to stop trying to convince others of the validity of your path, your story? Do you know your worth? And is it time to stop trying to convince others of your worth? And do you know that you don't have to hustle for your worth? Because it's not dependent upon what you do. It's there because of who you are and the gift of life you've been given. So, my brothers and sisters, today it is 2017. Don't give your life to the trivial. Figure out what you want to give your life to, the few things. Amen.